Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Friday and welcome to Fairytale Friday. Today we're going to be talking about the ugly duckling. The story about the ugly duckling who grows up to become a beautiful swan is extremely well known, and variations of it can be found in most collections of children's books. By accident, a swan's eggs gets mixed in with a clutch of duck eggs, and after taking a long time to hatch, with the mother duck almost giving up on the egg, the swan emerges. But the ducks don't realize it's a swan. In fact, they don't know what it is at all. They only know that it looks odd to their eyes. Consequently, there was some debate as to the identity of the duckling. It took to the water, so the mother duck concluded that it wasn't a turkey, and so she proceeded to teach it to swim and raise it and all that else. However, the ugly duckling was not accepted, not by its siblings who teased him for his looks, and not by the other ducks who advised the mother duck to just give up on him. In the farmyard, all the poultry similarly rejected the ugly duckling. He then flew far away to a moor where there were wild ducks. They came to investigate the duckling, wanting to know what manner of duck he was. He was polite to them, but then the wild ducks declared that he was exceedingly ugly, but they wouldn't hold it against him, and he could be around them as long as he didn't marry into their family. And as if that wasn't enough, our duckling encountered some goslings. They also pronounced him ugly, but they said, why don't you come and migrate with the flock? Where we're going, there's a lot of single geese, and I'm sure you could find yourself a wife, even if you are homely. But before the duckling could make up his mind as to this particular plan, there were hunters that came round and they shot at the geese, and the duckling was understandably frightened away. Next, the duckling came upon a cottage. It was inhabited by an old lady, her favorite cat, and a hen. But the duckling was deemed useless, even foolish, because little duckling longed for a swim. He couldn't purr, he couldn't lay eggs. He just wanted to be out there and swim, and so he was ridiculed. After a time, the duckling left and he made for the nearest pond. He happily swam, although the other animals in the area avoided him. They still considered him very ugly. Then autumn came around. The days grew cold, and the duckling was still by himself. Although by this time other animals began to feel sorry for him, that doesn't mean that they were associating with him. Then one day a flock of great and beautiful birds flew across the sky, and the duckling had never seen their like before. He called out to them. He actually made a sound that he'd never heard himself make before, and he was just enraptured, just admiring their beauty so much that he longed to be one of them. The poor duckling was so lonely. He missed everyone he'd ever known, even though they hadn't treated him particularly well, and he would have gladly lived even with the original ducks if only they had been kind to him. Now, overnight, the water in the pond turned to ice, and the duckling tried it as he might, but eventually all the water froze around him. And then the next morning there was a farmer who came by, saw him, and had the mercy to chip him out of the ice, and he took him home. But the duck was very fearful of harm coming to him in the farmer's house, and not without reason. There were rather rambunctious children, and a farmer's wife who looked a bit too handy with the carver. So he escaped, and after that he went through a long, hard winter when he was cold and all by himself. However, after a while spring did return, and life returned to the land. The duckling felt his wings grow strong as he took to the skies, and then he spied 3 beautiful swans, and they were rustling around in the bush and around the waters, and the duckling realized he'd recognized them from before, and he determined that he would go and meet them. Now he was fearful that they would find him so ugly that they would kill him just for having the temerity to approach him, but he decided that he'd rather face his fate at their hands than be pecked at by the ducks, beaten and ridiculed by hens, pushed around by humans, or starving to death the next winter. So the swans fully nestled into the water. The duckling joined them, and the swans rushed to meet him, but the duckling despaired. He thought it was going to be the same old chase-away routine that he'd experienced many times before. So he bowed his head, asked the swans to kill him, and he just looked in the water. But then, as he was staring, at the water, he realized he could see his reflection. And to his amazement, his reflection matched that of the swans. And he realized he was no ugly duckling, but he was one of them. The swans warmly welcomed and they comforted the former duckling. He was so happy. He no longer regretted his hardships because everything he went through made him all the more thankful to be embraced and accepted at last. Then a group of humans came upon the swans. They were feeding them breadcrumbs and admiring them. The formerly ugly duckling was declared to be the most beautiful swan of all, and he was shocked because his whole life he had been called ugly and treated poorly. Never could he have imagined that things would turn out in this happy way, to be called beautiful, to have friends, and to be home at last. It's a simple story with a happy ending, but there are several ways of looking at its meaning, and we have a few layers to peel back. The first and the most usual interpretation is that those who aren't the most attractive in their youth can mature into beauties later on. The principle can also hold true about situations that start off pretty rough but eventually come to a good conclusion. The second theme has to do with acceptance and how difficult it can be to be accepted by those who you are different from. It raises questions about what is acceptance based upon. Because it wasn't just the appearance of the duckling that was rejected, it was also a difference in instincts and the fact that the other animals chose to be unkind when the ugly duckling didn't fit into their nice cookie-cutter norm. The third theme is about the power of early childhood programming. From the very beginning, the duckling was teased for its looks, treated badly for its looks, and scolded for every difference he had from those around him. The duckling took what others told him at face value, and this is very typical of children. They are inclined to believe what they're told as part of how they are teachable and how they learn about the world and learn to survive. But if children are never taught critical thinking, some of them never grow out of the habit, and this makes it extremely difficult for such people to be able to separate opinions from fact and perception from reality because it was not part of their base programming, and it has a very detrimental effect upon them throughout the whole course of their lives. The fourth theme of the story deals with prolonged loneliness and how one can be driven to desperation as a result. The duckling felt so isolated towards the end of the story that he was literally willing to risk death just to be close to the swans and to be near something beautiful before he met his end. And then the fifth theme is the reassurance that even if it takes a long time or involves heartbreak, it is possible to still find belonging. And that belonging is all the sweeter after enduring rejection and hardship. So clearly, the struggles of our ugly duckling go far beyond the realm of not possessing what those around might consider to be good looks. It raises questions about how people can just throw their manners away for very little reason. What does it mean to be accepted and on what basis? And how long can the spirit endure after suffering a pattern of abuse from multiple quarters? Now, to begin with, this story is an indictment against the adult animals, beginning with the community of ducks. The adults should have been setting a good examples for all the ducklings, and they should have placed greater value upon having a good heart than what they considered to be a pretty face. This is also a lesson that one cannot force others to accept or value them. The reason why we might find ourselves experiencing rejection, it might be for a good reason or a bad reason or completely lacking in reason, but we can't turn that rejection into acceptance by force or by tolerating the abuse. People have to be willing to see our virtues to give us the time of day, and if their hearts are closed, then our conduct won't matter. And if their hearts are that hardened, it's unlikely that any acceptance they might have to offer would be of any genuine value. It's very dangerous to accept illusions as fact, and this is particularly true when it comes to forming communities. If the bonds are not genuine, there will come a time when you find that out, and you find it out the hard way. Next, the duckling showed considerable endurance throughout the story. He wasn't just surviving, but he was keeping the goodness of his heart intact. He didn't become malicious or hateful or vengeful. He retained his good nature even when there was no hope in sight. Now, we know that it's one thing to endure a bad situation if we can see an end date. We might grumble through it and like, well, okay, this isn't going to last forever. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is going to end and I can keep going till then. But it is much more difficult to get through something if we don't see an immediate way out of it or if we don't believe that it's ever going to end. It requires true strength to carry on in that situation. The final takeaway of this story is the relief and the healing effect that true acceptance has upon the spirit. It makes our past troubles seem small, and even if there is something that was awful in our past. We might have chosen to face it willingly if we had known that there was going to be a good outcome to it at all. The bad that we experience becomes just a moment in time, and with enough living, good experiences, friendship, and love, we can outlive our trauma, and our spirits become stronger than they ever were before. So that was my meaning on the ugly duckling. I would like to hear about your interpretations now. Either let me know in the comments below or come join us on Gilded. There's a link in the description box. It says it'll have our link to our server. It's called Blackbird's Brew. You just click on it. It'll take you to us. Most people, they don't have too much of a learning curve before they get to figuring out how Gilded works, and they feel pretty comfortable with it. So not to worry. And if you have any questions upon arrival, you can just reach out to me and I will help you as best I can. Or I will throw you in the path of someone else who might be of more technical use. Either way, we will get it figured out for you, and hopefully that'll be the beginning of many other conversations. But that'll do it for this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.